as opposed to writing it in the chat. Okay, so with the review behind us, let's move forward. The walled city, this idea of a walled city, what does the walled character of a city say to you? When you hear that a city has a wall biblically, what does that image mean?
Stay away.
Okay, I mean, that's certainly the message for the outsider, is stay away.
Well, it needs protection.
It means protection, right?
For the inhabitants.
I'm sorry, Myrna, what?
For the inhabitants.
Protection for the inhabitants, absolutely. A walled city is a fortress, right? That's the idea of a walled city. That's why you build a wall. If you take a look at source number 1, I guess it's also a good infrastructure project. It gives people jobs and so forth. Let's not forget that. But take a look at source number 1. This is from the book of Bamidbar, of Numbers. The Jews are in the wilderness. They're camped out at Sinai for a year after they receive the Torah, and then they're told it's time to enter Israel. And they decide in their travels that they like to send in spies. They want a sense of what this land is going to be like. And we know that story, of course, is disastrous in the end. The spies come back, warning them the people there are too powerful, we can't possibly manage, and so forth. But what we're looking at in source number 1, in the first part of it, is part of the instructions they gave to the spies. What is it that we want to see as we enter this land? What is it that we're supposed to be looking for, is what the spies want to know. And take a look at source number 1. And what is the land in which they dwell? Is it good or bad? Okay. And what are the cities in which they dwell? Are they in open camps or are they in fortresses? I just put the link again in the chat for the source sheet for anyone who doesn't have it. What are the cities in which they dwell? Are they in open camps or in fortresses? The word in Hebrew for fortress there is mivtzarim. It's a fortress, an area in which they are protected by having a wall outside. So that's one of the chief questions that they put to the spies. Are the people there living in fortresses? Now, what's the message to you again? When they're living in a fortress, it means that, we said that it means that they are protected, right? What else could it mean?
It's a real form of security. It's a security.
Right. It might be taken, you could argue. But in any case, what we're saying is, number 1, yes, you have a wall and the wall is protective. And number 2, it might also tell you that the inhabitants are scared.
Yes.
Right? There's a reason why you build those walls. Those who build walls tend to be afraid of that which is beyond the walls. And that's a big discussion in its own right. Okay. Take a look still in source number 1. The second half of source number 1. This is when the spies come back. And look at what they have to say. First, they describe that the land is wonderful. The land is great. And then they write, those cities are fortresses, and therefore there's a lot of fear surrounding that. But there's another element to a walled city besides being a fortress. What else is there besides being a fortress?
Keeping people out.
Keeping people out? That's part of a fortress, I would think. But what else?
The city-state.
Wealth, I heard?
Keeping people in.
The city-state.
City-state.
I would have thought that they have experience already with war, because people who are living in a free, open city, they feel secure, but people who feel they have to build walls around themselves are people who have experience with being attacked.
Right, that's fair.
They also know one another, and they're very comfortable with one another.
Well, one would hope so. If you're stuck in a walled city together, we'd hope that you'd get along. What I'm looking for, in addition to all of that, is permanence, right? An open area in which people live, but there's no wall. You can sprawl, you can spread. This part is developed, this part is left undeveloped. When you're talking about a walled city, there is a permanence to it. And there's a very interesting application of that in the Torah. The Torah talks about a situation in which somebody's fortunes decline. A person was doing well financially, and then their fortunes decline. And as a result of the decline in their fortunes, they need to sell off their property. So that may be that they have to sell off an ancestral field, and it may be that they have to sell off their home, perhaps their home in a walled city. So the rule, if they sell off their field, is that they can buy it back 2 years later. They have to give the buyer a couple of years to have it, because otherwise that's not good. That's not fair. But 2 years later, they can buy it back at the basic price that they sold it for. There's more to it, but I don't want to get distracted by it. What I want to show you is the rule for when you sell a house in a walled city. Take a look at source number 2. And when one sells a house of dwelling in a walled city, its redemption shall be until the end of the year of its sale. For a year shall be its redemption. You have 1 year to redeem your house. What redeeming means is that you go to the person who bought it off you. You say, here's your money back. Straight up, I'm going to give you what you gave me, and now you have no choice but to return the keys. That's the way it works. And if it is not redeemed until a complete year has fully passed, the house in the walled city will stand permanently for the one who purchased it for his generations. It never goes back.
Not even in the Jubilee year?
Not even in the Jubilee year, exactly. That's what the text says. The Jubilee year, how many years is it between Jubilee years?
7.
Not
50.
7. 50.
49.
50. It's 49 years, and then year 50 is the Jubilee year. There's a Shmita year, the sabbatical year, that's every 7. The Jubilee year, in Hebrew is the Yovel, is every 50.
So technically it's not sold.
It is sold.
Well, technically, yeah, but if it's always there and you can always buy it back.
No, that's what we're
Only
saying is you
after a
can't.
year.
Your field you can always buy back. Your house, only up to a year. And then after that, it's gone. Whereas if you're dealing with a field, if you sell off a field, it's an ancestral plot. It comes back to the family in the Jubilee year. Whether the Jubilee year is 5 years from the time of sale, or whether it's 30 years from the time of sale, doesn't matter. It always comes back. A field always comes back. That's where Marilyn is right. The field hasn't really been sold. It's been rented out. The house, it's gone. After a year, you didn't redeem it, it's gone. As opposed to if it's in an open city. The text continues in number 2. The houses of villages which have no wall around them shall be considered as fields of the land. It may be redeemed. And in the Jubilee year, it will revert. If it's in an open city, you could buy it back. You get it back automatically in the Yovel, in the Jubilee year. By the way, this is the Torah portion, not this coming Shabbat, but the following week, the Parsha of Bahar. So what we draw from here is that walled cities have stability. They have permanence. So those are the two elements. They're fortresses and they're permanent. And the message here then, in terms of understanding what we're supposed to take away from this and take away from the battle in Jericho, is that the Canaanites are fearsome. They have developed a permanence in the land. And here's the key. The war you are fighting is not really about a city. The war you are fighting is about the land itself. It's about the identity of the land that they hold. And that becomes very important as we transition to talk about the collapse of the wall. Take a look. Oh, you don't have it because I didn't bring it again. It was in last week's sheet. The text said in Joshua chapter 6 that we saw last week that the wall fell beneath itself. The rabbis understood what that means is not that the wall collapsed, but that it sank into the ground. Straight down. The wall is as though it had never been there. What's the message of that kind of miracle? What's the message in that?
If they're ready to expand, if they're ready to receive new people, that the community is going to change.
Well, receiving new people, I mean, Jericho is, as we had said, destroyed, and you're not allowed to build it up again. So I'm not so sure about receiving new people.
Well, it seems to be open for change, obviously.
Okay, yes, I would agree with that. What else?
It's very vulnerable, actually.
I think it's giving a message that goes two ways. It's a message to the Jews who are coming in, and it's also a message to the Canaanites. To the Jews, it says, don't be intimidated by these walled cities. You were so scared in source number 1. Though no, they have fortresses. Don't worry about the fortresses. They're going to get crushed. They can't do anything. And don't worry about their permanence either, because they're not permanent. That which identified them as permanent has disappeared. And it's a message to the Canaanites, don't think your walls are going to defend you. That's what I see here. But more than that, it goes back to what we said last week about Jericho, right? We said that Jericho is a city which is devoted to immorality, as presented. Number one, we compared it to other Canaanite cities that we knew about, the city of Sodom as an example. But number two, we talked about that woman Rachav being pressed into service as a zonah at the age of 10. And her clientele are the leadership of the city. That's the personality that we're given for this city. And so what we're told now is that this land is being rebranded. All that was built up in that city is being demolished as though it had never been there. And now I come back to one of the things we noted last week. How many times do they go around the city?
7.
7 times, right? We said they go around 7 times for 7 days, right? We even had the idea that the 7th day, the day of the war, may have been Shabbat, right? 7 days, like 7 days of creation. This is a new process of creation. This is a new process of what we call in Hebrew Bereshit. The world is starting again. As you come into the land, and as you fight this initial battle, you're actually recreating the land itself. But more than that, they're told not to take the spoils. So we said last week, there are a few reasons why not to take the spoils, right? You want to show that this isn't a war of enrichment. This isn't something we're doing for ourselves. And I think that's important. But it's also because if you take the spoils, then what you're doing really is transferring the identity of the old city to the new one, right? You're taking the old city and now making it part of yourself. By saying we leave the spoils untouched and we never build up the city again, you're saying what was there is old and is not going to be part of the new world. You follow? I have more on that, but I see Mickey's hand. Go ahead, Mickey.
Wasn't it also just a way of taxation?
What do you
After
mean?
traveling for 40 years and equipping an army, the treasury was low. So they issued an edict that whatever spoils there are in this city, which is one of the oldest cities in the world, it comes to the government.
But the government didn't get it.
For general distribution.
That if the government took it, I would agree with you. But what we were told was only that the tabernacle, this Mishkan that the Jews had, got the vessels that you could use to serve in the Mishkan, and everything else was to be destroyed.
But it was the same thing, because the municipal and civic leadership was the priests. So they were wearing 2 hats, and they're saying it all comes in the west door into the tabernacle, and we are available to spend it out the east door because we're the leadership.
But they only got the vessels that would actually be used for temple service. They didn't get all of the wealth of it. They didn't get any money. They didn't get any animals. If I were trying to design what you describe, if I wanted to design a system in which the temple would be enriched by it, then I would have said, take all the animals. I would have said, take all the gold and silver, but they deliberately don't. They only get vessels they can use in the service. It was what we read last week in Joshua 6. I didn't bring you the text again on there, but I will tell you it is.
It's Joshua 6, 21, 25. It's number 15. Sorry, I have the sheet from last week.
Oh, thank you. Excellent. Thank you.
But where was the temple?
The temple, it's a traveling one at that point. It's a Mishkan, and it's in a place called Gilgal, which was where they crossed the Jordan River. Etty, you were going to say?
Yeah, I have a problem with this. Why they destroy the city? I thought they came to inhabit the land.
Exactly.
You said never to rebuild it, leave them alone and continue on their way to inhabit the land.
Correct. This city is meant to be, unlike any other war they would fight, this city is meant to represent that the land is being rebranded. You're not going to live there. You're not going to build it up. It's counterintuitive. I would have expected, move in. It's a great walled city. And what they're told is don't move in. This city is meant to represent the change coming to the land. That's exactly the point. But I'll go even further. Take a look on your sheet at source number 3. This tells a story that happened later on in Tanakh, much later on, actually, centuries and centuries later. This is in the time of the prophet Elijah. You're now, give or take, 500 years after that war with Jericho, give or take a century. So at this point, the Jews have split into 2 kingdoms. There is a southern kingdom and a northern kingdom. The southern kingdom was known as Judea. The northern kingdom was known as Israel, Yisrael. The southern kingdom had Jerusalem and tended overall to be much more traditional, much more focused on Judaism as it had been practiced. The northern kingdom, on the other hand, veers into idolatry. And they have kings who actually make that their mission. And one of those kings is a man by the name of Achav, or in English, you would call him Ahab.
Did you say the north was Israel?
Correct.
Or
that was what was called Yisrael. Okay. Correct.
Okay.
So take a look at source number 3. And Achav made, this is describing his activities. Achav made the Asherah. Anybody know what an Asherah is?
An idol.
So it is idol related, correct? It's some form of tree worship.
Isn't it Astarte?
So Astarte is actually different. A lot of people connect the two, but the Astarte was called Ashtarot in Hebrew, and Asherah is actually separate. The Asherah was tree worship, in which either they would worship the tree itself or an idol that was at the base of the tree. There's some dispute about that. But Achav makes the Asherah, and Achav added acts to anger Hashem, to anger God, Hashem, God of Israel, beyond those of the previous kings of Israel. He's an overachiever. In his days, Chiel of Beit El built up Jericho. With his firstborn, Abiram, he established her foundation, and with his youngest, Seguv, he set up her doors, as per the word of God spoken by Joshua, son of Nun. In other words, what this is trying to tell us is that the curse that was stated last week at the end of chapter 6, whoever builds it up is going to lose his children along the way, actually happened with this fellow Chiel, who builds it up under the direction of King Achav. So, Ian, I see your hand. Hang in there for a minute. With such a terrible price, why in the world does Achav insist on this? You have to know who Achav is. Achav's goal is to reverse their entry into the land. The Jews came into Canaan and converted it into the land of Israel. He wants to reverse that. Achav married who? What was the name of Achav's wife?
Jezebel.
Jezebel, correct. You know who her parents were? Her father was Et Baal, king of the Tzidonim, a tribe that lived in the area, not Jewish. That's how you have to know that going in. Achav and Jezebel are worshipers of the Baal, one of the Canaanite, or the main Canaanite god, perhaps. Throughout their career, we see them trying to roll back the presence of the Jewish God in the land. Elijah has a whole back and forth, not for our discussion right now. But the point is that Achav sees this as a coup. He wants to roll back the conquest of Jericho and erase the memory of it. And that's his goal. So that's why he wants to build up the city. Ian, thank you for waiting.
Nope. In number 3, what didn't Ahab, wasn't he try to eliminate the worship of idols, but not idolatry?
He was not trying to eliminate it. No, Achav is a very interesting person because sometimes he seems good and sometimes he seems awful. There's a lot to be said about Achav beyond the scope of where we are here. But he did not battle idolatry, no.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So what I have for you, Mark, yes.
Just going back to the spoils, God never commanded that. It was Joshua's idea. God never said don't take the spoils.
No, that was part of our discussion last week as to whether that was so. But yes, that does seem to be so. That was the discussion that we had.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, we talked about why and so on. Okay, so I gave you review questions on the sheet, which I'll just run through very quickly. First of all, what was the goal of destroying Jericho? So we said it was replacing immorality. That's the idea. How many days did the war with Jericho take? 7. Good. Thanks, Rose. How many priests carried shofar horns? We said 7. How many circuits did the priests make around the city?
7.
And then, which of these is not a characteristic of walled cities in the Torah? Security, permanence, agriculture.
Agriculture.
Right?
Agriculture.
Good. I originally had set this up as a poll on Zoom, with a multiple choice and everything, but it would take too much time, so I'm just doing it this way. Which of these is the message of the miraculous collapse of Jericho's walls? Rebranding Israel? Time to build a casino? Walls are prohibited around Israeli cities.
1.
Number 1,
No,
correct.
2.
There's actually a lot of discussion about walls in Israeli cities. Jerusalem, of course, being a walled city. There's more to be said about walls, but that'll have
what does the casino have to do with it?
Oh, nothing. It was just to mislead you. Jericho had the Oasis
Now
Hotel
they
and
do.
Casino. Yeah, but that's a longer discussion also. Okay. So let's get started now with Ayalon. This brings us to a brand new topic, and that is the battle in Ayalon. And this is a different type of war altogether. So first of all, can anybody tell me, if you didn't look ahead, what is the major miracle that happens in Ayalon? What's the miracle that happens in Ayalon?
Sun and the moon.
Right, Miriam says it, the sun and the moon halt. Etty, you're trying to signal that also? Or you're pointing at your ceiling? Okay, the sun and the moon halt. So what we're going to see is that in this battle, Joshua says, Shemesh begivon dome, v'areach be'emek Ayalon. The sun in Givon should be silent, the moon in the valley of Ayalon. So this is interesting for a whole host of reasons. But what's particularly interesting is an article I'm going to show you in source number 4 from the Royal Astronomical Society Journal of Astronomy and Geophysics, 2017. It actually was building on work that Israeli researchers did earlier that year. They found the date of the war by saying that what happened in Ayalon with the sun and the moon was an eclipse. And what they believe is that's the earliest recorded solar eclipse, technically called an annular eclipse. Take a look at source number 4. It's an excerpt, and I gave you the link so you can find the full article. There is a possible reference to a solar eclipse in a puzzling passage in the biblical Old Testament book of Joshua. This records that after Joshua had led the people of Israel into Canaan, he prayed, "Sun, stand still," the Hebrew word is dome, "at Givon, and moon in the valley of Ayalon." The passage continues, "And the sun stood still and the moon stopped," the Hebrew is amad, "until the nation took vengeance on their enemies." If these words are describing a real observation, then a major astronomical event was being reported. Quote from Joshua, "There has been no day like it before or since." But what does the text mean? The Hebrew word dome means to be silent, dumb, or still. The term amad, that they stopped, is a broader word meaning to stop or stand. Modern English translations of this passage, such as the New Revised Standard Version quoted above, have all followed the King James Version of the Bible, translated in 1611, and assumed that the Hebrew text means the sun and moon stop moving. However, a plausible alternative meaning is that the sun and moon stopped doing what they normally do. They stopped shining. In other words, the text is referring to a solar eclipse when the sun stops shining. As a solar eclipse can only occur when the moon is directly beneath the earth and the sun, between the earth and the sun, the moon itself is not visible, and so it is not reflecting sunlight to the earth. Like the sun, it has stopped shining as well. The first, by the way, just pause here. Does this seem credible to you that it's an eclipse?
Yeah.
A lot of people like this idea. Okay, hang in there. The first person to suggest that Joshua 10:12-14 was referring to a solar eclipse seems to have been the linguist Robert Wilson, who almost 100 years ago gave the following translation: "Be eclipsed, O sun in Givon, and the moon in the valley of Ayalon. And the sun was eclipsed and the moon turned back while the nation was avenged on its enemies." Wilson claimed that the Babylonian cuneiform text there are words with the same Hebrew as, that in Babylonian cuneiform texts, there are words with the same root as the Hebrew dome that are used in Babylonian astronomical tablets in connection with eclipses, meaning to be dark. So this term could be a standard eclipse reference. However, at that time, 100 years ago, it was not deemed possible to investigate this further because of the laborious nature of the calculations required. We needed computers. And I gave you a link to another article about this in Times of Israel. Yes, Mark, go ahead.
But isn't the whole point of stopping the sun so you have sunlight? In an eclipse, it's dark.
Thank you. This, while it's a beautiful idea, it's fascinating, and it will be so cool to actually figure out that this is, the date it happened, and this is how it happened, and there really was an eclipse then, and people would feel good because it's like Immanuel Velikovsky, right? For those who read him, you can solve everything by just assuming there were eclipses. The problem with it is what Mark points out. The goal of asking the sun and the moon to stop is not to eliminate daylight. It's just the opposite. You'll see in the text, we're going to read it. It'll be in source number 7, or no, sorry, not number 7. It'll be in source number 10 that the Jews were winning the war. If you're winning a war, you don't ask for the lights to go out. You ask for light to extend. I don't want the sun to go down. You follow? It doesn't make any sense in the story if this is an eclipse. So while it's a fascinating idea, and I give them points for creativity, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Etty, that's what you were going to say? Betty, is that what you had your hand up for?
Yeah, Joshua wanted the light to. Yeah, Joshua still wanted the light to be on, so they can finish the war before it got dark. That's why he made it stand.
Right. So it's a fascinating idea, but it can't be right.
No.
Yes, Rose.
So, one can say the eclipse, I mean, there was all this stuff and then there was the eclipse, and the eclipse is very brief. It was a reminder to the people that it's actually God who dominates.
Except that it's not
therefore, the moment of darkness, like I'm just saying.
Right now, and I hear you, but I think when we get to the text in number 10, you're going to see why that doesn't work. You can look ahead if you want and see, but the
okay.
but it won't bear out, unfortunately. Yes, Mickey. You're muted.
A solar eclipse does not result in total blackness. It's just there's ambient light. And certainly a battle could continue.
So a solar eclipse doesn't have ambient light, but what it does have, they actually suggest along the lines of what you're saying, is it was an annular eclipse. And in an annular eclipse, you can see the corona, not to use a bad word, but you can see the corona of the sun around the moon. So it's true that there is some light. It would be more duskish than full night, but nonetheless, there's no reason for Joshua to want that. He's winning the war. He doesn't want the lights to go out, even to be dimmed. It doesn't make any sense. But let's see the story. We have a lot to talk about. I just thought that as an interesting point to introduce it. Yes, Rosalind.
So last week, didn't it say somewhere that they just blew their horns and the walls fell down? Did they actually engage in some type of a battle, or was this just, the horns made the walls fall down?
So good. What you're pointing out is that this is a very different kind of battle. The Jericho battle, they didn't have to do anything. The wall collapses and then everybody inside is sitting ducks. However, here, you're going to see shortly, this was a real war. They're fighting against soldiers.
Okay.
Each of the battles that we're going to be seeing in our series is different in that regard. This one is actually a war to defend a Canaanite tribe. So let me explain how this happens. First of all, if you look on your sheet at source number 5, you'll see links. When I taught the book of Joshua, it took 6 weeks to get through this part about Ayalon. So those are links to the recordings. So if you want, you can spend 6 hours on this story instead of the time that we're going to be spending on it. There's an awful lot to talk about. But let's talk context first. At this stage in the book of Joshua, the Jews have fought 2 wars. They fought, well, technically 3. They fought Jericho, and then they fought the city of Ai twice. They lost the first time, they won the second time. The Canaanites are now very, very concerned. And so in Joshua chapter 9, in the beginning of the chapter, the Canaanites rallied to create a joint force to attack the Jews. If you take a look at source number 6, you'll see the verses. And it was when all of the kings across the Jordan, in the mountains, in the Shephelah, we're going to talk about the Shephelah more when we talk about Elah as one of our later battles. Along the shore of the Great Sea toward Lebanon, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, the Jebusite, all of them heard, and then all of them gathered together to battle Joshua and Israel with one mouth. All of them said, we want to battle the Jews. The people of Giv'on heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, and they came up with a different strategy. They said, maybe when someone knocks off Jericho like that, fighting them is not a winning move. We have a different idea instead. And here's what they did. This was a tribe that lived in Giv'on. Their formal name is the Chivi. That's their name. You saw the Chivi mentioned already there. This is a group of Chivi. And they decide that they have a better approach. We saw last week the passage from the Jerusalem Talmud that said that when the Jews approached the land, Joshua sent messages into the land in fulfillment of the biblical requirement to sue for peace. He sent messages saying, if you want, you can leave. If you want, you can make peace. And if you want, you can fight. And nobody responded by offering peace. However, they thought, maybe it would have been a good idea for us to take up that offer. But now it's too late. That offer was only good until the Jews crossed the Jordan. So what they did instead in Joshua 9, and we're not reading the full text here, but you can take a look at it in Joshua 9. What they did was they sent emissaries to the Jews, pretending to be coming from far away. We're not those Canaanites you're supposed to be fighting. We're somebody else. We come from far, far away. And they wear ragged clothing as though they've been traveling for a long time. And they bring stale and moldy bread as though, it's been a long journey. And they request a peace agreement. And Joshua and the leadership accept the agreement. They don't ask God what to do. They don't even debate, explore, do your due diligence. Instead, they accept the deal. They're tricked. So the people after that are very angry at the leadership. How could you have done this? But they decide they're going to honor the agreement. They made an agreement with these people, the Givonim. They're not going to fight them because they don't want to be a nation that doesn't keep its word. They're worried about what kind of message that would send. If you look more at Joshua chapter 9, you'll see more of the discussion there. So right now, at the onset of chapter 10, the Jews have made a deal with Givon. Givon gets to stay. The Canaanites are not happy about that. The Canaanites decide we need to send a message among ourselves to make sure that nobody else tries to make peace with the Jews. And that is what brings us to source number 7, the beginning of Joshua chapter 10. Everyone sees it? Okay. When King Adoni-Tzedek of Jerusalem learned that Joshua had captured Ai and proscribed it, right? They destroyed it, treating Ai and its king as he had treated Jericho and its king, and that, moreover, the people of Givon had come to terms with Israel and remained among them, he was very frightened. For Givon was a large city, like one of the royal cities, in fact, larger than Ai, and all its men were warriors. So King Adoni-Tzedek of Jerusalem sent this message to King Hoham of Hebron, King Piram of Yarmut, King Yafia of Lachish, King Devir of Eglon, come up and help me defeat Givon, for it has come to terms with Joshua and the Israelites. So what you have is this group of Canaanites who have decided that they're going to go to war not with the Jews, but with Givon. And the 5 Amorite kings, the kings of these cities, with all their armies, joined forces and marched on Givon and camped against it and attacked it. So the people of Givon sent a message to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal. Do not fail your servants. Come up quickly and aid us and deliver us, for all the Amorite kings of the hill country have gathered against us. So Joshua marched up from Gilgal with his whole fighting force, all the trained warriors. So the Jews in this battle are doing something very different. This is a battle to defend one Canaanite nation against the attack by other Canaanite nations. You follow? A couple of side notes that I think are worth noting. Did you notice that there was a king of Jerusalem? Right? Jerusalem is not a Jewish city at this stage. Did you notice what his name was?
Adoni-Tzedek.
Adoni-Tzedek. What does Adoni-Tzedek mean?
Lord of Justice.
Lord of Justice, Master of Justice, precisely. Isn't that a beautiful name for the king of Jerusalem? Like, yeah. I think that's a really nice name for the king of Jerusalem.
It's a nice name if it's true.
Well, yes, only if it's true.
It's truly that, right?
This is true. Well, take a look, please, on your sheet at source number 8. Rabbi David Kimchi, Radak, a classic commentator to Tanakh, lived in, I want to say, the 13th century, 12th century into the 13th, says all the kings of Jerusalem at the time were called Malki Tzedek or Adoni Tzedek. Do you remember Malki Tzedek? When Abraham got involved in the war between the 4 kings and the 5 kings in order to save Lot, his brother-in-law, after the war was over, Malki Tzedek, king of Shalem, approached him. So Shalem is Jerusalem. So Radak says all the kings of Jerusalem were known by Tzedek. If you take a look at source number 9, the Midrash picks up on it and says, because Jerusalem is a city that makes its residents just. It is a city of justice. Interesting point, worthy of discussion another time. I wanted to at least point it out. Take a look back in source number 7, please, at the second sentence. What is it that King Adoni Tzedek is upset about? There are a lot of different things here, right? What is it that Adoni Tzedek is concerned about?
That the people.
First of all, that Gibeon was actually a large city, that it wasn't like a small place. Right? It was a royal city.
Oh, no.
It had prestige.
Right. That's one for sure.
So that was a big concern, and plus they were warriors.
Right.
I would say that they were afraid because by Givon hooking up with the Jews, that they would be in a bad position, like that they were coming to get them all.
So that's definitely a part of it. I mean, the fear starts with the fact that the Jews have defeated Ai and Jericho, right? That's your starting point in it. Then there's also the fear about this being a mighty city and their surrender is going to make everybody lose heart. Also that the Jews now have a stronghold among them via these people of Givon. But there's one more element that is easy to miss. Tell me something. There's one more element that's easy to miss. If you go back to source number 6, who was it who decided to make an alliance to battle against Joshua and Israel? Who was it who made that alliance?
Lots of nations.
Lots of nations, but it wasn't the nations. It was the kings. Do you remember I pointed out to you the people of Givon are Chivi, who were really supposed to be part of this alliance? What happened was the kings of these groups, these tribes, got together and said, we need to fight. However, the people of Givon rebelled against their king. Mickey, you're going to like this. The kings got together and said, our strategy is going to be rally our armies and fight. The army of the people of Givon said, sorry, we're not interested. It's a case of the people saying, this strategy is not a winning strategy. We're going to try something else. And effectively subverting the royal order of the king of the Chivi. You follow? So that also scares these kings because they say, if these guys do it, what's to stop all of our populations from bolting? We need to send a message. And the message has to be that we are all united in battle against the Hebrews. So with that in mind, take a look at source number 10. The Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them, for I will deliver them into your hands. Not one of them shall withstand you. Okay? He says, don't worry about it. Joshua took them by surprise, marching all night from Gilgal. And again, remember what Joshua is doing? Joshua's goal is to defend the people of Givon. The Lord threw them into a panic before Israel. Joshua, inflicting a crushing defeat on them at Givon, pursued them in the direction of the Beit Choron ascent and harried them all the way to Azekah and Makedah. All that route, he's pursuing these nations who had assembled. While they were fleeing before Israel down the descent from Beit Horon, the Lord hurled huge stones on them from the sky, all the way to Azekah, and they perished. More perished from the hailstones than were killed by the Israelite weapons. Hail is a really interesting thing to see here. I'm going to come back to the hail. On that occasion, when the Lord routed the Amorites before the Israelites, Joshua addressed the Lord. He said in the presence of the Israelites, "Stand still, O sun at Givon." This is the JPS translation. "Stand still, O sun at Givon, O moon in the valley of Ayalon." And the sun stood still, and the moon halted, while a nation wreaked judgment on its foes, as is written in the book of Yashar. Coming back to the book of Yashar for a moment, but now you understand why I have a hard time thinking Joshua would have wanted any form of eclipse. He has his enemies on the run. He's not interested in pausing the battle. He's interested in pursuing the battle. And it's not that it halts temporarily, but just to finish this, and then I'll come back to you, Mickey. Thus the sun halted in mid-heaven and did not press on to set for a whole day, for the Lord fought for Israel. Neither before nor since has there ever been such a day when the Lord acted on words spoken by a man. That's your passage. Now, Mickey, what's your comment?
Hail is a very common occurrence during solar eclipse.
That what?
That it seems to tie in to the eclipse theory.
What do you mean?
First of all, Joshua was prepared to fight at night in the dark, and hail happened during the battle. It all seems to add to the eclipse theory.
But he didn't fight at night. Oh, you mean marching all night from Gilgal?
He marched all night. He wasn't afraid to fight at night.
I didn't read it that way. I had thought that he was marching at night in order to arrive by morning and surprise the enemy.
Doesn't say that.
I thought that that's what marching all night from Gilgal means. In other words, Gilgal and Givon are not side by side. He has to move his troops. He moves them by night in order that nobody should know. And in the morning, he's able to attack. That was my read. Who in the world fought at night back in those days?
The Joshua and his troops. One of the reasons they were successful, they spent 40 years practicing for this invasion.
It's an interesting idea.
That's what they did in the desert. Israel became a nation of warriors. They spent 40 years practicing, sharpening their tactics. Now they're ready. They can fight at night. They can fight during the day.
Where does it say they practiced during those 40 years?
What do you think they did for 40 years marching through the desert?
They complained a lot.
Right. They spend a good amount of time being hungry. They spend a good amount of time complaining about the food.
Complaining.
And hardening themselves to be non-slave warriors.
It's an interesting idea. That's for sure. The image, I have to say, of them fighting at night is an interesting one. I think on a practical level, it's hard to sustain, but I can't say for sure that it's not correct.
It's certainly a tactic that was used later. Gideon certainly used it in his war. That was the whole purpose of the jars and the torches.
Except that he doesn't. I mean, he's attacking a camp while they're sleeping as a sneak attack.
And what was Joshua doing? Why do you think he marched all night?
No, but he surrounds, and well, actually, we won't get to Gideon, so I'll just say it now. What he does there is that he surrounds a sleeping camp on all sides because he has fewer men, and he wants to gain the measure of surprise against them by causing confusion in the camp.
And Joshua also had fewer men.
I mean, look, you can make the argument. I don't see it, but on the other hand, I can't prove you're wrong. There was somebody else who had a hand up, but I don't remember now who it was. Okay. So what you're seeing, though, leaving aside the eclipse question, is a major miracle where the sun.
Miriam had her hand up.
Oh,
Miriam.
Okay, Miriam?
Yeah, not urgent.
Okay. Etty.
Yeah, just.
Rabbi, can you give us a map of from where to where they went?
So next week, I actually am going to have that because I wanted to discuss the battlefield of Ayalon. I was going to bring a map on next week's thing. I didn't expect to need it this week, but essentially, Ayalon is
okay because there's a lot.
Right. Ayalon is pretty centered in Israel in terms of east-west alignment. But yes, next week you're going to see a map that's going to help with that. It's a fair distance, not so far, but it's a fair distance. What I wanted to just highlight, we only have a couple of minutes, and I'll stick around for questions as always. But God choosing to become involved here. On a simple level, God chooses to become involved because we are his people and he's supposed to be protecting us. However, there's a fellow by the name of F. Charles Fensham who wrote in Biblical Archaeologist in 1964 what I thought was a correct point. He says, the Jews swore an oath in God's name to protect Givon. So God's name is on the line here if they don't do it. And so God is going to step in, not just because of his relationship with us, but because God is part of this defense of Givon. I thought that was a really interesting insight that he made. So Joshua appeals to God, and God responds with a halting of the sun and the moon. Now, we all are aware, hopefully, that this is a sort of thing that is cosmologically impossible. Right? Meaning if you halt the sun and the moon, you create a whole bunch of problems. Not just on Earth either. All of this has to be wrapped up in the miracle. In other words, either you accept the miracle happened and God took care of all the other problems that go along with it, or you don't buy it, lock, stock, and barrel. Or you explain it away as an eclipse, which I suppose would be a third approach. But what we will talk about, I hope, next week, as part of the discussion of the miracle, is a very interesting view that is brought already in Ralbag, Gersonides, 700 years ago, about whether, in fact, the sun stopped or did not stop from a standpoint of Jewish tradition. There's a lot more to say. There's a lot more to talk about, and God willing, we'll enjoy it next week. But I'm going to stick around for questions and comments, and I will not hold anybody late. All right. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good class.
Yes, thank you. Miriam, you had a question.
Lag BaOmer Sameach.
Lag Sameach.
When I'll get to it, can I have it now?
Yeah, please, Miriam.
Yeah, as I'm reading all the information that you gave us and I'm listening to it, all the time in my mind, I hear 1948.
Me too. I was thinking
All
the same
time,
thing.
1948. History is repeating.
Yes.
What do you mean?
It's frightening how much similar it is.
Yeah. You mean in terms of the sun and the moon halting?
No.
No. In
Ayalon
terms of
that would be cool. Okay, thank you.
Ayalon in 1948 and the notes you gave us.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I missed the first half of your sentence.
The Ayalon of 1948.
Yes.
What is the similarity between let's assume 1948 and Ayalon?